Hello and welcome. In today's top 7, I'm going to share with you the best easy Ark tames. And just before we get into it, like and subscribe as it really helps the channel. So in at number 7 is the Yeti. The Yeti is definitely an essential Ark tame for boss fights and is also just a great carnivore overall. This thing is relatively simple to tame, but the only real difficulty is this is usually found in very hostile areas of the map. And usually with a Yeti you will always find a couple of Carnotauruses, as they always like to follow the Yetis, as the Yeti commands the Carnos to follow it and attack for it. But overall, it is just a very simple knockout tame, so it actually isn't too bad. If you are well prepared and you do have yourself the net launcher or a trap, this thing will be a very easy tame. But once you've tamed it, what are you actually going to use it for? Like I said before, this thing does have amazing melee damage, but it also has two special abilities. Firstly, it has the Fear Roar, which will debuff the enemy creature, and also it does have a Courage Roar as well, which will buff your creatures and also debuff the enemy creatures. But just take into mind that the Fear Roar's effects will only work on creatures of a certain size. So look for medium to smaller size creatures. Anything really up to the size of a RG or a Pteranodon should be fine for the Fear Roar to work. In at number 6 is the Allo. Now this thing is really a great carnivore which pretty much every Ark player should tame, and it is only a little bit easier to actually tame than the Yeti because it tends to not have as many hostile creatures around it, but this is still a very simple knockout tame that doesn't really require too much prep to be able to tame this thing successfully. Just either bring a next gun or a trap and quite a few tranks. The Allosaurus, when wild, will usually spawn in packs of 3, and in that pack there will be a pack alpha. If you didn't know already, the pack alpha is determined by the level of the actual creature, so the highest level Allo in the pack will become the alpha. Now in my opinion, you should just build a trap to tame this thing, and then you can lure all 3 of the Allosauruses into the trap, and you can tame 3 in one go, giving yourself a nice little pack of Allosauruses just to get you started. And also their saddle isn't unlocked at a very high level as well, so you can definitely tame it in the mid game and fully utilize these things. Also, on top of that, once tamed, these things have a wealth of great abilities, and you can also take advantage of that pack buff which you see in the wild once tamed as well. The pack creature will have an orange glow, and it is essentially just a buffed Allosaurus. It will just be able to deal more damage and have a damage resistance buff. And if you count mate boost as well, your Allosauruses are going to be buffed even more. And also on top of that, they do have the bleed ability when they attack something, which will instantly drain the health of that creature, and I think it's about 25% of a creature's health with 1 bleed damage drain, which to be honest is really insane, and no matter the health of that creature, it will still deal that 25%. So it is a way to really easily kill really tough dinosaurs. And this is an ability that even the Rex doesn't have, so it actually does have an advantage over some bigger carnivores. Speaking of the Rex, in at number 5 is the Rex. Now this thing is definitely a great carnivore for boss fights, not because it deals the most damage or has the most health out of any Ark creature, it's mainly because it is just so balanced in every way. Yes, it does have a great health stat and a great melee stat, but compared to something like a Spino, it is a lot more balanced. Yes, a Spino may do a bit more melee damage than a Rex, but it has far less health, making it a lot less useful. But the thing is, compared to something like the Allo or the Yeti, the Rex is actually usually a easier tame, as there is not as many hostile creatures around it. Allos usually come in packs, and Yetis usually have Carnotauruses around them, whereas Rexes tend to travel alone. The only creatures that you'll actually find around them is just the general creatures that spawn in the area. You never really tend to find Rexes in packs, which actually makes it easier to tame overall, as you don't have to worry about even more hostile creatures. Then once you do actually have yourself a Rex tamed, this thing is going to be an absolute machine for any of your tasks. The only thing which I'm not really fond of with the Rex is it does tend to get stuck on a lot of the objects in the Ark world, but apart from that you really can't complain, and it is definitely something special to have an Ark Rex. But keep in mind that its saddle is unlocked in the late 70s, as compared to an Allo it may not be as accessible early on. In at number 4 is the Spino. Yet again another carnivore that is easier to tame than the one before it. I assure you the next creature isn't one of these bigger Ark carnivores. Now personally, the reason why I think this is a lot easier to tame than something like the Rex is mainly because it spawns in a much less hostile environment. Yes, the rivers may have piranhas, but the mountains have RGs, other Rexes, scorpions, and sometimes even gigas or the Carcharodontosaurus. So actually, the Spino spawning environment is usually a less hostile place. Also on top of that, I don't think it has as much torpor, so I'm pretty sure it takes less tranks to knock out than something like a Rex. And also it does have less health, so if you do have a reasonable melee weapon or creature, these things are a bit easier to kill if the tame goes completely wrong. And once you have tamed yourself a Spino, you do have yourself a real beast of a creature. It is definitely great to have a Spino, and I usually do definitely have one around. Like the Rex though, these things do tend to get stuck on quite a lot of objects in the Ark world. But compared to something like the Rex, they do have some abilities. Mainly, they have a hydration buff, which is also what the Shadow Mane has as well. So when they touch water, they will actually get a damage buff and a damage resistance buff, meaning these things are actual real beasts when in the water. And also, since the TLC update, these things can stand on their hind legs and do even more damage than otherwise. So these things are real beasts of the carnivore world, and they have a wealth of abilities on top of that. Definitely at some point tame yourself a Spino. So in at number 3 is the Deodon. Yet another great creature for bosses, and finally not a big carnivore tame. Because yes, carnivores aren't actually the only creatures you need to tame on Ark, even though all of the creatures on this list are carnivores. But either way, the Deodon is actually a very simple tame, and a Deodon will get you very far in boss progressions, and is also just a great creature if you have just been in a big fight with something like a Giga and your creatures are wounded, as this thing is going to heal your creatures very fast. Yes, not as fast as a Snow Owl, but on my top 10s, or in this case a top 7, I tend to put creatures that are not behind a paywall except Ark itself, so that is why the Deodon is on this list and not the Snow Owl. The Deodon is actually a very simple knockout tame and will tame very quickly, as this thing definitely likes to gobble meat, and if you are using that passive healing ability, you will know how much meat it takes. So in at number 2 is the RG. Now when I was preparing this video, I actually was dictating putting the Pteranodon on this list instead of the RG, but this is mid-game tames, and to be honest, an RG is just far superior than Pteranodon. It simply has to be on this list. Overall, this thing is a very simple knockout tame, only really requiring a trap if it is a high level. But for lower levels, this thing, you can just whack a few trank arrows into this thing and then follow it and maybe give it a couple more, and this thing will be out cold. Then after that, just feed it whatever meat you've got. Normal meat, prime meat, mutton, just whatever you have at the time, unless you're specifically taming a max level, and then you probably want to use kibble. But once you do have this thing tamed, you know how much of a beast an RG is. This thing is the best creature. I even rate it higher than the Quetzal for doing metal runs, as it has weight reduction on things like metal, obsidian and crystal. And on top of that, its saddle acts as a portable smithy. So this thing is insane, and if your metal tools break, you can just craft another one right on the fly. Unless you don't have smelted ingots, then you will have to go home for that. But the RG is really a mid-game creature worth taming. And in at number 1 is the Baryonyx. Now this thing really is the beast of any PvE Ark run, but also the beast of any mid-game Ark player's life. This thing is an absolutely insane creature, and every Ark player does need to tame one of these things at some point, because these are by far one of the most useful creatures you will ever tame in Ark. And on top of that, because this is an easiest tame list, these things aren't actually that difficult to tame, apart from you obviously having to go to the swamp, which is a rubbish biome, and every Ark player hates that. Never go to the swamp unless you're taming one of these things. These things are actually a very simple knockout tame, not really requiring a lot of skill or preparation. But just take into mind that these things do eat fish. Don't try and eat the meat and then get your tame killed by a Sarco because you left it overnight. I've made that mistake before. Don't make that mistake at all. But once you do have one of these things tamed, these are by far one of the best creatures for doing cave runs. These things will fit into pretty much any cave. Yes, this doesn't matter as much now with the introduction of cryopods, but these things are still very useful now, as they deal a very reasonable amount of melee damage, and they have enough health to carry you through any cave. And if you are doing underwater caves, they have a hidden secret ability. By pressing C on your keyboard, if you're on PC, they will have a spin ability, which will actually stun creatures up to the size of a megalodon. And for the underwater caves on the island, this thing is really great for that due to this ability. Maybe don't use it on Moses and plesiosaurs, as it doesn't work, but for anything smaller than a megalodon, this thing is insane. So thank you to my wonderful patrons Katerina Puchkova, Karina Thorne, Dominic Maciejuski, and Ethan Tapia, who have all supported me through Patreon or through YouTube memberships. If you want to join this list, then go join Patreon or YouTube members, but thanks to all of these guys.